Dragonflight, the 9th expansion to Blizzard's wildly popular MMORPG World of Warcraft, launched at the end of November 2022. That means it's been out just under 2 months at this point, and I've been playing it a little over one of those months. Ultimately, I haven't played World of Warcraft since Mists of Pandaria, September 2012 that was, and I think I left early in 2013, so I am literally 10 years out of the game at this point. As a returning player, therefore, I thought I would come back in at this point and do a video for you all talking about what is new in this expansion and whether or not it's worth your time. Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie, also known as Celeste Soulbinder in this case, and today I'm going to be comparing Dragonflight as an expansion to the expansions I've previously experienced, mainly of course Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, and Mists of Pandaria, although I am fairly familiar with the middle ground as well, due to the whole leveling process, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. If you do enjoy this video, please do let me know, hit like on it, drop a comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Anyway, let's jump right in then to talking about Dragonflight. So, as you can see, if I come out of my character onto the character creation screen, I have been leveling like an absolute madman recently. Dragonflight increases the level cap from level 60 up to level 70. If you were to download World of Warcraft completely free, you can go up to level 20, your subscription will then take you all the way up to level 60, and you will then need to purchase Dragonflight to add the last 10 levels. That's why I've got a lot of characters here sitting on 60. I returned to the game, I leveled up a whole load of my old characters plus a whole swathe of new ones all the way to level 60, and I talked about that in my previous video about how that's a really cool system. But today we're going to be looking specifically at Dragonflight, right? So let's jump back in. Having got all the way up to level 60 on multiple characters, I have run through the Dragonflight quests a multitude of times at this point. I think 3 times through most of them, plus a couple of others are still going through in different areas. So essentially, as I said, you are given an additional 10 levels to the game, and if I am to open up the map here and zoom out, this is our new area, the Dragon Isles. When you arrive here, you come in via the Waking Shores, before then proceeding through the other 3 areas, and finally ending up here in Thaldraszus, which is kind of the Dragon City. The leveling experience is pretty cool, if I'm being honest. It's a little bit linear at first, but for someone who's gone through things like Shadowlands, it's not quite as linear as those at least. Shadowlands has this really kind of tunnel vision of how it wants to take you through questing, whereas this, you still have your main storyline, which starts in the Waking Shores, moves through the Anaran Plains to the Azure Span and then to Thaldraszus, but you can, once you've got a single character up to level 70, new characters coming in can just kind of pick one of those zones and go with it and start doing all the side quests and seeing more of the main storyline. By following just the main storyline, you will hit around about level 70, just as you're hitting the main city of Valdrakken, but if you are to sit there and do all of the side quests, you'll find you level up a darn sight quicker. I'm currently doing a character through Anaran Plains, and he's almost level 70 already, despite having basically done just that one zone and a couple of dungeons. So leveling through this expansion, very, very quick. But what about the storyline? Now, obviously I don't want to say too much about the storyline because spoilers and all of that, but it's solid. I'm not going to say it's the best it's ever been. I honestly think that that is Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm as far as questing storylines go, but it's solid. It's a lot of fun. There's some interesting new factions that you get to meet and work with some really cool rewards and some really interesting and unique quest ideas as well. It's not just gather 10 of these, kill 12 of those kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of bonus objectives get thrown out at you, just things that you can do whilst you're exploring the world. Now, you are as well capped to ground mounts while you're here. You cannot fly out here, although that doesn't particularly matter because very early on you will unlock dragon flying. Now, dragon riding is just this really cool ability. Essentially, you can use these mounts, gather momentum, and end up doing some really, truly ridiculous speeds and just whipping around the islands and exploring to your heart's content. And if you are, like me, someone who's big on sort of exploring exploring and seeing everything that the game has to offer, you can also upgrade your dragon riding, hence these icons at the top here, with this entire sort of talent system that gives you a load of really cool abilities. You can get from one side of the Dragon Isles to the other in a matter of minutes without having to touch a flight point. Your standard, well, your high-speed flying currently anywhere else is about 310%. This, I believe, goes over 800%, so you are very fast. You unlock this really early on in the quest line, and honestly, to me, dragon riding is one of the best things that have been added to World of Warcraft, genuinely, in decades. Like, I've looked at previous systems, like when they added vehicles back in Wrath of the Lich King and so on, and those were pretty cool, especially how they integrated them into raids like Ulduar, but just the dragon riding, the sense of freedom and exploration and power that it gives you is just insanely good. Now, while we're on this screen, I'll talk briefly about one of the negatives about this, that it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. It's not really a negative, it's just a personal negative. And that is how reputation now works. Now, back when I used to play World of Warcraft, reputation ranged in various different tiers, all the way from hated up to exalted, and mostly you started at neutral and you worked your way up through friendly, honoured, revered, and ended up at exalted. And once you hit exalted, you unlocked the top tier rewards for that particular faction. There'd be some at friendly and honoured and revered, but it was mostly exalted that you were going for. Now, this time around, these are absolutely massive, and I don't know if this is something they've done in previous expansions, I've not seen it, but instead of just basically going from friendly to exalted, you now have 25 levels to go through of reputation. Now, obviously, you can get a lot of this via questing, and as you're doing daily raids, well, as you're doing weekly raids and things and dungeons, you will find other ways to get that reputation up as well. There are items that drop in the raids that you can hand in for a bunch of the reputation with different factions, and in a lot of cases, the endgame quests actually reward you a choice of different reputations, which is really cool, so you can focus on one quite easily, and you don't just have to grind them and their quests this time around. You can be doing that whilst also running dungeons and just doing other things around the side of it, which honestly I think is really, really cool. I like the fact that there's so much choice and variation there. I do think 25 levels feels like an awful lot, but hey, we're only a month in. I guess it gives you something to work towards, right? Now, on the subject of dragon riding as well, it's not just a case of this really cool full freedom to flap around and do your thing. There's more freedom than that as well, with the Rostrum of Transformation. As you go through the game, you will first of all unlock this red Proto-Drake, and then as you quest through, you will unlock the Windborn Velocidrake, the Highland Drake, and eventually the Cliffside Wilderdrake. Now, these are not just mounts, they are fully customizable with all kinds of different options, and I'm saying that while showing you just the one or two. Lots of different color options, lots of different horns and things like this, so you can completely customize what you want your mount to look like. And you'll notice that a lot of these are still locked for me. You get documents from various different things. Some quests will give you some are dropped by world mobs, some are dropped in dungeons, some are actually crafted by Inscription as well, which is pretty cool. And so you can go through these different mounts and customize these to your heart's content. Some of it's linked to reputation as well. Like if you want to make something a Black Drake, for example, you're going to need the blueprint that you get from working with the Black Dragons. And I like this. I like this an awful lot. Customization, versatility, and variance are key aspects for me in a game like this, which is why I'm running a full transmog set here. This isn't what my gear actually looks like. I pay a little bit of gold just to make sure that I look exactly the way I want to. So, okay, we've touched briefly on dungeons there. What is the dungeoneering experience like? Well, again, some really interesting stuff going on here, and you'll hear me use that word an awful lot. Interesting. Now, for the most part, when leveling up, the dungeons are really quite straightforward. Queue times are short currently, obviously there's a lot of people playing and leveling from 60 to 70, and the dungeons are honestly really good. Most of them have some interesting mechanics, like you've got the Ruby Life Pools, which has some really cool bosses and a big rush around the top to it. You've got things like the Azure Span, which is a really cool throwback to the Nexus War aspect of Wrath of the Lich King. You've then got dungeons like the Noku Defensive, which essentially is the entire Anaran Plains zone turned into a dungeon, and you're going to need to use your dragon riding to navigate and get from boss to boss and trash mob to trash mob. And there's some really cool stuff going on there, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but the new Uldaman Legacy of Tyr, where they've taken Uldaman, which was one of the classic World of Warcraft dungeons from the 1 to 60 experience way back when, they've completely redone it, and oh my goodness, it is probably one of my favourite dungeons of all time. I know some of my guildies have already said that they're worried the voice lines and things are going to get old quickly. I don't think they will. Now, once you hit level 70, of course, you still have your dungeons to run for gear, and it scales with you. If you've done a dungeon at level 60, you might get a piece of gear that is at level 60. Once you do that same dungeon again at level 70, the same item might drop, but it's now got better stats because it's scaled at level 70. Now, you do dungeons for a while and eventually unlock heroics. Heroics are pretty much face roll at this point. Then you have your mythic dungeons. And I've been running quite a few of these recently as well. You start at Mythic 0, which you run through. You get some cool loot from that, which is decent, you know, epic quality rewards. You then get these keystone items. And these keystones then allow you to increase the difficulty of a future mythic and get better rewards from it. And sometimes these have some really cool effects. This particular one, you can see it's adding the effects Tyrannical, Sanguine, and Explosive. Explosive puts these really awful bombs everywhere. Tyrannical means you have the whole plus-minus mechanic from the Razageth fight, if you're familiar with it, where you have to, like, well, it's not quite the same mechanic, but you get given a plus or minus charge and you have to run to someone with the opposite charge to clear it. That's while you're trying to do an already pretty tough dungeon, and yeah, just throwing all these additional mechanics on. It's great fun, and if you are the kind of person who really enjoys 5-man dungeoneering, then Mythics are just a really fun way to do so, because you can up the difficulty at your own sort of pace, and there is a sort of running, like a rolling circuit to these, where in different seasons they will have different dungeons in the rotation. That's the word I'm looking for, rotation. So like, for example, we've got Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, Temple of the Jade Serpent, and a couple of others in, along with a load of the Dragonflight dungeons. Then next season, we imagine that those will change around a little bit, and you'll have different dungeons to run. And those are cool dungeons, interesting mechanics, good lore, good design and layout. The new ones specifically I really enjoy. Now, once you hit level 70, I'm going to be completely honest. The first tier of raiding, which is the Vault of the Incarnates, I should have some footage on screen of this right now, I am a mixed bag about. Like, the fights are genuinely really interesting, and the concept of the dungeon is pretty cool too. Like, if I were to open up my map here, I'll keep the footage playing if it's on screen. It says here, the Primalist breached the Titan prison used to hold the Incarnates for millennia. Within, Razageth performs a foul ritual to unleash her siblings, so together they can purge the world of the Titan's influence. The champions of Azeroth must assault this impregnable fortress and break their defenses to end this threat. While many could fall, defeat condemns all the realms to the Incarnate's reign of fire and blood. And that's pretty cool, right? That sounds pretty cool. And it is. The fights are really cool. You get to meet a few of the bosses during the quest lines running up to, which I always really like. I don't like it when you end up in a raid and it's just like, who the hell are we fighting? Like, jump back to Molten Core. Who were any of those bosses? The only ones you can really say anything about are Majordomo Executus, who is basically Ragnaros's firekeeper, like housekeeper, and then the Firelord Ragnaros. Out of what, 8 bosses, 9 bosses in that dungeon? 2 of them have any form of backstory. All of these have backstory and presence, and you get to meet them ahead of time, which is really quite cool. That said, as awesome as the fights are, I do feel the actual raid layout is very generic. Maybe that's coming from raids like Icecrown Citadel, Ulduar, Dragon Soul, which had this real sort of lived-in feel to them. You know, it wasn't just a dungeon, it was a Titan facility or Icecrown Citadel itself, this kind of thing. You know, you had this actual story behind the area. The Vault of Incarnates, it just feels like kind of a big cave that has some bosses and trash in it. And until literally you reach the very end. Razageth's room is pretty cool and has some lore behind it, but everything else just feels like it's a big cave that you're running through. It's kind of a Nixia's Lair scaled up, dare I say, and that's probably going to upset some people, but that's just how I see it, you know? So, I love the raids, I think the bosses are fantastic, but I do kind of wish there had been a little bit more when it comes to the actual design of the the actual design of the raid itself. I also have to say that the tier sets really don't impress me. They all look pretty much identical. If you're looking at the cloth set, the leather set, the mail set, the plate set, they are all very, very similar to each other, which means, again, this is going to be sort of a love it or hate it kind of thing, really, isn't it? On one hand, you're going to have people who love that because it means their entire raid group, if they're not transmogging, kind of end up looking as if they're in a uniform. Then you're going to have other people who sit there and go, well, it doesn't matter because, you know, transmog. But for me, I just kind of look at some of the older sets, and Warlock's a really bad example for this because most of the old sets are absolutely awful. Hello. But, you know, you get some really cool old sets. And then you just kind of, look, it's much better around here, but I can't just click on them quickly. I'm keeping this nice and short. It just feels really uninspired in the set design there. Even the ones you get beforehand, again, it's almost identical, whether that's cloth, leather, mail, or plate. They all look the same for the Raging Tempest. Now, the Raging Tempest is another part of the endgame experience. You'll find, see if there are any of them up now, and watch as there just aren't. There are these elemental storms around, no, they're not on the map at the moment, where you can just grind enemies to earn a currency, which you use to buy gear. You can then, 4 times a week, one for water, fire, air, and earth, each of those 4 elemental storms, you can hand in a quest that will give you 2 of the rarer item that allows you to turn your blues into purples. So there's all kinds of different ways for gear, and I'm not even going to touch on PvP because I just don't do PvP, right? You've then got factions like the Obsidian Citadel, working with the Maruk in the Anaran Plains. The Azure Span has the Tuskar of Iskara, where you're working with them to sort of work on feasts, etc. There's a lot of stuff you can do for your daily quests in addition to all your dungeons and raiding and things like that. There is tons to do. For me, my only complaints really about the main experience there, as I said, I think the storyline leveling up is awesome and, you know, pretty good. It's not as good as it has been, but then again, it's very hard to kind of keep up with, like, the Arthas and Illidan arch lines. I think those are, you know, Deathwing through Cataclysm. They're good storylines, they're engaging, and they're well written, which is a refreshing change after some of the stuff I've seen in Legion and Shadowlands. It's well written, it's engaging, and it's not this cataclysmic world-ending threat of cosmic doom. It's a little bit more grounded, should we say, and, you know, that's pretty cool. I'm down with that. I'm down with that. The final thing I really want to talk about, though, then, is the Evoker class. This is the new class that has been added to the game specifically for Dragonflight. It's a hero class, which means it doesn't start at level 1, it actually starts at level 58 with its own unique leveling experience up here in the Forbidden Reach. So you get to learn who you are as a Drakthir Evoker, and it is worth noting that unlike other hero classes, you know, even like when Monk came out in Mists of Pandaria, you could be monks of different races, and they also added the Pandaren. In this case, they have added the new race, the Drakthir, and they have added the new class, the Evoker, but the two are exclusive. You can only be a Drakthir Evoker, and you can only be an Evoker if you're Drakthir, if that makes sense. You know, Drakthir, the one class they have is Evoker, and Evoker is only available to the Drakthir. And it is a really cool class. I can't really demonstrate it from where I'm sitting here, but you do get some really, really cool abilities. Like, notably, not even talking about combat here, if you wanted to look at the dragon riding, these guys actually get this just as basic movement, which does work through the old zones as well. So you can run into Stormwind City or Orgrimmar or whatever and just fly around. Also, the class itself comes with 2 different specializations. You have a DPS, which is a caster, and a preservation healer. Devastation and Preservation. Devastation is really good fun. Like, genuinely, it's one of those specs that you can play, anyone can play it pretty well really easily, but there are ways to just make it so good. The way that its racial interacts with the abilities essentially means that if you can get full-on uptime of some of these abilities, you can do just absolutely disgusting damage, and it looks really cool because you get things like Fire Breaths, and these charge-up cone attacks. The longer you hold the button, the more they do. You actually have full-on dragon fire attacks. And that also works the other way around for the healer. The healer has the same kind of thing. You have that as a healing breath in the cone, and that swoop you can do as a healing breath too. Evoker is a lot of fun as a healer and as DPS. The only downside to it currently is that most of the spells are about 20-25 foot range, which is really short if you're used to playing a caster, and that takes a bit of getting used to. But honestly, Evoker is a lot of fun. There's so much you can do with this, so much really cool stuff. It is slightly disappointing that you can't change your gear. Like, most of what you're looking at here on the character is how I created it as part of the character creation. In fact, if I were to open up the sets as we saw them a second ago, you'll see that the only thing that actually ever changes is essentially your belt and your shoulders, and that's kind of disappointing. It feels really sort of almost semi-half-assed. But even then, I guess there are other parts to that. Like, where's the ability here? Somewhere. You should have... it'll be under general, won't it? You can change into your standard actual humanoid form, which does have a full armor set. Whatever you're wearing appears fully here. You can see I haven't upgraded my helm on my trousers yet, so I look a little bit weird. But you can do that. But that's only out of combat you can take on your visage. In combat, you're always in Dracthyr form, which means you don't really get to show off your armor all that much. But again, very, very minor complaint, and the fact that you get to do the whole soaring thing is just insanely good. Like, you can literally clear across an entire zone with this, go leveling, and it does the whole thing of you can build up momentum and then get more speed and to get higher, sort of, and just, it's great fun. I have not had as much fun just flying around and doing stuff as I have with Evoker and Dragon Riding. So, how does it compare to the other expansions as I've played them? Well, it's not my favourite expansion. Again, that probably goes to either Wrath of the Lich King or Cataclysm, just for the sheer lore and the raids, but it's kind of hard to compare because I played through the entirety of those expansions and I saw everything, whereas we're only 2 months in at this point. I think some of the designs feel a little bit lackluster, but overall it is really, really solid. I think the new class and race are fantastic, if, again, somewhat let down by the fact that the armor sets just are not at all inspiring and there's very little you can do there, though there are absolutely tons of customization options for your sort of personalized appearance, so I guess the armor doesn't matter all that much. I think the dungeons are brilliant, I think the mythic experience is brilliant, the raids are absolutely astonishing, except for the fact that the actual location feels really quite bland and drab. It's kind of... it reminds me a lot of Molten Core in that it's just brown tunnel after brown tunnel with bits of lava, some staircases. There are some cool little interactions, and there is an ice area to it as well, and a wind area. But for the most part, it's just... it doesn't feel quite as inspiring as, say, Ulduar, which of course has just launched for Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Anyway, folks, that's my opinion. Those are my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. If you're playing, if you're an old World of Warcraft player, what do you think? You know, how does it compare to other expansions for you? When did you start playing? Which expansions really gave you the best feeling in the game? What did you enjoy most about this one? What have you enjoyed most about previous expansions? Come and chat with me. I'd love to know your thoughts. Anyway, folks, thank you for watching this one right the way through to the end. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. So, happy sailing, and see you all in Azeroth.